Hey, so I'm reading Aristotle. I went to Barnes and Noble. I got the basic works of Aristotle. So it's big book. I was looking for a book like complete works of Plato. This one's like 1,487 pages. So it's big. I bought it for reference for like a long, forever in the future. I wanted to talk about sort of my first general impression. I've never read Aristotle. I've heard of his ideas. 23 pages into his work, I read a little bit of the introduction, and I think it's interesting. I'm going to continue on with it. Okay, first general impression though. He's a bit dry to read. It sucks reading Aristotle. I am just getting to parts that are interesting. Here's why it sucks. First, he's very dry. He's very scientific. He starts with categories, talking about the definition of things, the definition of categories, the definition of substance, the definition of relations, the definition of quantity. So he's very scientific. So he starts out by saying, this is what it means to be something. This is how we measure it. This is how we assign different values to things. So all that's a bit dry because, and maybe that's just me personally, because I found like biology boring, whereas I found chemistry and physics more exciting. Biology was boring because it looked like a just classification of going out into the world, and I think Aristotle was sort of the first scientist in that way, and so I could see his way of thinking that's very dry. I'm getting to a point where he's talking about quality. I'm interested in that because in sort of just professional career, working in healthcare, the term quality is thrown around a lot, but I want to get a real definition. We'll go all the way back to Aristotle and we'll work from there. So that's kind of, I read this for a lot of reasons, but first and foremost is because I'm interested in philosophy. I got to start from the beginning, and I want to share my general impression. Never reading Aristotle before this, I learned that Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great when he was about 40 years old. He was the son of a physician. He did a lot of work in Plato's school, but it is unclear if Plato was there at the same time. But Aristotle was at that school for 20 years. And then went on to complete a bunch of his works. And the reason Aristotle is so famous, much like Plato, is because he has complete works that were, his thoughts on basically everything. So as a philosopher, from how he defines things, his scientific method of organizing the world, going out, collecting lots of studies. He was kind of like Darwin before, in 383 BC, I believe is when he was born. So it's not like how I thought it was. Socrates was a really good philosopher, probably the first philosopher, went around, asked a bunch of questions, challenged people's ideas, but didn't write anything down. Plato wrote down a bunch of stuff, included Socrates in his dialogues. Plato started a school, and then Aristotle attended that school for 20 years and was kind of arguably the first scientist. And then he writes down a bunch of his stuff. He's from Thrace and wasn't Athenian. Plato, I believe, was from Athens. So that was kind of interesting because I thought Aristotle was from Athens, but he wasn't. He had to leave Athens so that they wouldn't, I think, kill him, and they were alluding to killing Socrates. This is all just stuff I'm learning about Aristotle that I didn't know. Mentioned that he was Alexander the Great's teacher, and then so his stuff got preserved probably for that reason. After Alexander the Great's death, Aristotle's work got preserved, and then 300 years later it went to, from wherever it was, to the Romans, and the Romans preserved it for kind of all of time. So that's why we have Aristotle's complete works to this day. Okay, here's what's included, the contents of this book. Biographical note, preface, introduction, Organon, the collection of Aristotle's logical treatises. Categories, that's complete. De interpretation, on interpretation. I'm going to do the English version. On interpretation, prior analytics, posterior analytics, complete. Sophistical refutations. Physics, complete. So that's a lot. It's like more than 100 pages. On the heavens, books 1, 2, chapter. On generation and corruption, complete. On the soul, that one's called De Anima. That one's complete. And then the short physical treatises. That includes On Memory and Reminiscence, complete. On Dreams. Okay, that'll be interesting. That's complete. Prophesizing by Dreams, complete. The History of Animals. The next part is On the Parts of Animals, books 1, chapters 1 through 5, book 2, chapter 1. The next one is On the Generation of Animals, book 1, chapters 1, 17, 18, 20 to 23. Metaphysics, complete. Nicomachean Ethics, that's complete. I've heard a lot about that, so I'm going to read that. And then Politics, complete. And then Rhetoric. And then Poetics. Okay, I'm trying to figure out what Aristotle means by quality. And it's hard because he'll spend like a whole paragraph telling me what it's not. I'll give you an example. Those conditions, however, which arise from causes which may easily be rendered ineffective or speedily removed, are called not qualities but affectations. For we are not said to be such and such in virtue of them. The man who blushes through shame is not said to be a constitutional blusher, nor is the man who becomes pale through fear said to be constitutionally pale. He is said rather to have been affected. Thus such conditions are called affectations, not qualities. So it's like he's trying to tell me the definition of quality. He spends a paragraph telling me that that's an affectation. So he's very complete in his way of explaining things, and that causes it to be really dry reading. Okay, he says that justice is a quality. Injustice will also be a quality. Quality describes like what a thing is. If a thing is white, it may become whiter. So qualities admit a variation of degree. I do understand. I got to the end of the quality, explanation, and then he goes on to talk about action and affectation and contraries and variations of degree, and then proposing categories, and then he talks about the various senses in which the term opposite is used. Things are said to be opposed in 4 senses. 1 as correlatives to one another, as contraries to one another, as privatives to positives, and as affirmations to negatives. So it just gets very in the weeds. I can see why this is interesting, but it's just not that interesting to me. But it's interesting to see the origin of thought and all the work that's been done on logic, on grammar, on the definition of things since Aristotle. All right, that wraps it up.